is about how nerve impulse travel from one neuron to another. Nerve impulses are electrical messages transmitted along nerve fibers at high speed. It's just like the electric current that transmit along an electrical wire. However, nerve impulses cannot travel directly from one neuron to another because there is a narrow gap between one neuron to another neuron. And this gap we call synapse. Or this structure we call synapse. This junction between two neurons we call synapse. Let's watch a video about how nerve impulses are transmitted across the synapse.
Nerve impulses are electrical messages transmitted along nerve fibers at high speed. However, nerve impulses cannot travel directly from one neuron to another. Let's see how nerve impulses are transmitted between neurons. The point where the axon of one neuron joins the cell body or dendron of another neuron is called a synapse. The ending of the axon is called a synaptic knob. When a nerve impulse reaches the synaptic knob, it stimulates the synaptic knob to release a chemical called neurotransmitter from synaptic vesicles. The neurotransmitter diffuses across the synaptic cleft. It stimulates the cell body or dendron of the next neuron to generate a nerve impulse to continue with the transmission.
Now let me explain to you the structure once again. Now the whole structure we call a synapse. This is axon of another neuron, and this is the dendron of another neuron. And this narrow gap between neurons does not allow nerve impulses to travel through directly. The whole structure is called synapse. And inside the synapse, you find that this synapse, the axon, at the ending of the axon is shaped like a doorknob. We call this synaptic knob, like a knob, right? A synaptic knob. Inside you can find a synaptic vesicle. And this vesicle inside contains some chemicals we call neurotransmitter. Some chemicals. And between this gap we call synaptic cleft. Synaptic cleft. Now, synaptic is the adjective, just like describe the synapse. It's a noun. The whole structure called synapse, and this is adjective become the vesicle in a synapse we call synaptic vesicle. Now, at the other end of the other neuron, this is the dendron. You'll find there are some receptor site. And this receptor site actually is to allow the neurotransmitter to combine here. So again, nerve impulse, when a nerve impulse arrives at the synaptic knob, this will cause the synaptic vesicle. It will approach to the edge of the synaptic knob membrane here and release the neurotransmitter inside in the synaptic cleft. And the synaptic cleft, the neurotransmitter is released here. And in this structure, you can also see some organelles. And like, for example, like mitochondria, all right, provide energy, and the rough endoplasmic reticulum for the formation of neurotransmitter. And that's why usually you find the synaptic knob with these organelles. Now, when the neurotransmitter released from the vesicle, here with higher concentration, and it will diffuse across to the other side of the neuron of here, and that may bind to the receptor site of receptor site of the dendron here. So look the word diffuse. You should use the word diffuse here. How it travels is by diffusion. The neurotransmitter bind with these specific protein receptor on the membrane of the next neuron. So when it's combined, it will stimulate the dendron to produce or to generate a nerve impulse. We usually use the word generate a nerve impulse, or you can also use produce a nerve impulse. So, and then the electrical nerve impulse can continue. So here is the electrical nerve impulse travel along the axon of one neuron, but there's a gap. It cannot be traveled in electrical message. So it's used the neurotransmitter, the chemical message, to solve this problem, right? So that the messages can now change to chemical. When it's bind to the binding site here, it will trigger the dendron of this neuron to produce electrical nerve impulse that can be continue the conductions of nerve impulse, maybe to the effector. Now, this is an electron micrograph of a synapse. It is 30,000 times, so it's highly magnified. And the synaptic cleft actually is very narrow. It's about 20 nanometer. This is the synaptic cleft. And which side, you may ask, which side is the axon, which side is the dendron? Now, this side is the axon. Why you can tell? Because inside you can see a lot of synaptic vesicle. You can see a lot of synaptic vesicles at the axon of the neuron. All right, this is the synaptic knob. And this is the dendron of another neuron that may have some receptor site here to accept the neurotransmitter. So the synapse is very important. You can see that nerve impulse transfer from axon to a dendron at one direction. Why that nerve impulse travel this way? No. Now, because the nerve impulse will trigger the release of neurotransmitter and then continues the nerve impulse transmission this way. And you can only see the axon have this vesicle, right? Have neurotransmitter. All right, so you can see synaptic vesicles are present only in the ending of axon. So this can ensure nerve impulse travel in one direction. Another importance of synapses is usually a neuron from a synapse, it may link with many other neurons. All right, the messages of one neuron, how it will spread the information to the other neurons more widespread with a even better coordination. So usually a neuron from synapse with more than one other neuron. So it can communicate with other neurons. It's with a better coordination of the whole body system, right? It may involve many receptors or many effectors to give out the appropriate response. In fact, sometimes some of the drugs also act on the synapse. For example, some excitatory drugs to stimulate the response. It make it excited. It may it amplify the synaptic transmission. For example, stimulate the release of more neurotransmitter. Some drugs may inhibit the effect. Maybe the people is too excited, we have to compress, okay, limited the effect. So it may inhibit the release of neurotransmitter, or the drugs itself have a very similar shape of the neurotransmitter that it's just like the enzyme, inhibitor, it compete with the normal neurotransmitter for the receptor site. One more example is like the painkiller. Right, you know that when some when some area is pain receptor is being stimulated, it will send nerve impulse to your brain, and your brain will give you the pain sensation, right? So if the neurotransmitter is the receptor site of the neurotransmitter is being blocked, the nerve impulse cannot send into the brain to give you the sensation of painfulness. So the drugs is just like the similar shape of the neurotransmitter. All right, so it blocked the receptor site for the neurotransmitter that can send nerve impulse to your brain to give you the sensation of painfulness. So this is how the painkiller, some of the painkillers work.